Welcome to the Altair Emulator on Azure Sphere project. This is actually the repo for the project, and if I just scroll up to the top, you will see that there is a link off there to the wiki, and on the wiki you will find a complete table of contents of information about getting started with the project. Way more detail than I'm going to go into from this demo. Now, in terms of the device, I've got an AVNet Azure Sphere starter kit. Under the white label is actually the Azure Sphere module, and you can learn more about Azure Sphere from the wiki. There are three buttons. The button on the left-hand side is the reset button. In the middle, there's a button A, and there's a button B, and they have different functions. You'll notice as well, I've got two micro electronica clicks on this board. There's an SD click, and there's an 88 retro click on there as well. Now, while I'm here, you'll also notice that the IP address of the board is being displayed on that panel, and every 20 seconds until you connect, the IP address will be displayed. There are a number of sensors on this board as well. There's where I'm pointing to, there's a light sensor, and on the right hand side there is an accelerometer and temperature and pressure sensor. Right, so back on the desktop, I'm going to go across to the web terminal. So I just want to talk a bit about some of the things on the web terminal. So the web terminal is how you connect to the Altair running on the Azure Sphere. Now, just a bit of a context behind this. The web terminal creates a WebSocket to a WebSocket server which is running on the Azure Sphere device. Now, which the Altair Emulator connects to and talks to and sends messages backwards and forwards. In that Altair Emulator, there is a software implementation of an Intel 8080 CPU. It's actually an open source implementation, and that's really the heart of the system. Now, layered on top of that is a binary of an operating system from the 80s called CPM. And on top of CPM, there is a compilers as well as some sample applications. Okay, so now I'm on the terminal, so I'm going to just talk about a couple of things on this terminal. So if you look over on the right-hand side, you will see links, a number of links. So there's a repo of retro games, which you can play around with inside the Altair. And you can copy into the CPM file system. There's a link off to the wiki for the documentation. And there's a link off to the manuals. And the manuals that you'll be particularly interested in are the CPM operating system manuals, as well as the C compiler, if you're a developer, as well as the Microsoft Basic interpreter. Okay, so back on the terminal, what I'm going to do now, I've already entered the IP address of the Azure Sphere device. I'm going to click connect, and as I said before, that's going to create a WebSocket connection to the Altair Emulator, which is running on the Azure Sphere device. So it's not running in the browser. I'm using an open source JavaScript library called Xterm, which gives you this terminal capabilities, and then that's been hooked into the WebSocket. Now, Xterm is actually the same terminal that is used in Visual Studio Code. Alrighty, so now that I'm on CPM, I can go directory, and this will show me the files are on there. I can go change another drive. This is the case of C drive. I can go to the D drive, and I can go and do a directory on there. And I actually don't want this file on here, so I can go and do arrays star.star in this case, and we'll delete all the files in this off the D drive. I can go back to the A drive, and I can go pip, and pip is a command used for copying files from location or drive to drive. In which case, I'm going to put it back on to D equals mbasic.c, command I should say. And we'll go to the D drive, and I've got basically a Microsoft Basic. So I can go and start Basic. That'll fire it up, and I can go and type in a line of code, hello world, and then I can go and run that bit of code, and I get hello world. To leave Microsoft Basic, you just go ahead and type in system. That'll take you back to the command prompt. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is copying and pasting, because it's a little bit different. You just need to be aware of some of the changes or how it works. So the first thing to understand about copy and paste, if you're on Linux or Windows, you normally use Control-C, Control-V. Mac OS, you'd use Command-V and Command-C, etc. Now, when you're using the web terminal and you have a terminal session connected up to the Altair, what I'm doing is I'm hooking all the control sequences, Control-A, Control-C, Control-V, Control-P, whatever. those have been hooked and been passed to the emulator. So they're not available to the browser. So you can't just come along here and go say Control C and then wonder why it doesn't copy. So what you need to do is you need to mark what you want to copy, then right mouse click on it and open up the browser context menu and click copy. This will work on all browsers. And then you can come along and then just go, and you want to go and paste that in, and that would start up Microsoft Basic. So that's how you deal with copy and paste. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about is what happens if you get yourself into trouble and the Altair emulator kind of hangs. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to force a hang. So there are 4 drives to find. I'm going to try and get to the E drive, and easy enough, you make a typo. And then you kind of get into this world of pain and you can't get out of it. You can't Control C, you can't go back to the A drive, you get stuck. So the way to get out of this is you need to go into CPU mode and you need to reboot CPM. And if you look up at the top corner of the screen, there's some instructions on there on how to reboot the Altair. Now you won't have to do this very often, but you occasionally might have to, and this is how you get out of it. So I can go Control M, and then I press R for reboot, and that will restart CPM, and you can carry on from where you left off. Another thing you can do while you're here, go back to Control M, go back to the CPU monitor, and you can go and type in BASIC. And what this will do, this will load up the original Altair BASIC written by Paul Allen and Bill Gates. And you can get into this gate. So this has no operating system. This is pretty much BASIC against the metal. And we'll say no to that. And we're going to type in a code. It's just going to be print, you guessed it, hello world. And then I can go and run that. But most of the time you want to work in CPM, because in CPM you have a file system and you can save the files. For the implementation on the Altair, for this implementation, you can't save files from Altair BASIC. So I'm going to go back, CPU monitor, and reboot back into CPM. Okay, I just want to talk a bit about power management. So you'll notice, so the way the power management works is that if there's been a 10-minute period where there hasn't been any terminal I/O, so the Altair hasn't written anything and you haven't entered any commands into the Altair will then go to sleep, and it basically shuts down some of the threads and cuts off the Wi-Fi and to reduce power consumption. So what you can do is you can use the power command for that. And you'll see that there are a number of options in there. And the one that you may want to use is you may want to disable power management. You might have a good source of power, you're not running it on battery, and you could disable the power so it won't go to sleep. If you want to go and re-enable power management, you just go click on Power E, and that will re-enable the power management. You can also go and change the brightness of the LEDs. If I go and rank that up to 7, you'll notice, hopefully, that you can see that the LEDs are a bit brighter. If I go down to power 0, then you'll see the LEDs turn off. So we're just going to set them back to 7. Right, the other option you have for power is sleep. You might just go and put the Altair to sleep. And that's not that's not sleeping the whole Azure Sphere board, it's just sleeping the AVNet. So it's just sleeping the Altair emulator. Okay, so the next thing I want to say is that you need to wake this up. So what you do is you press button B. And button B will wake up the emulator. You'll see the LEDs will spring back into life. And if you're lucky and you've within inside like a 30-second window of putting it to sleep and bringing it back to life again, you'll have the same WebSocket will be alive and you'll be able to carry on working with that. Okay, so there are a number of demo apps on the platform, on the SD card that you'll have. And if I just go and do BAS, we've got MBasic, we're going to run the AVNet application. So we're going to run an AVNet, and you'll see that's displaying. I'm just going to pause that. You can see it's showing the temperature on the board, the pressure. In fact, I'm not sure why the pressure is not running. We'll just continue and run that a little bit longer. There we are, there goes the pressure. And we'll just Control C that again. So we've got the pressure, I've got the temperature, we've got the emulator version, we've got the light sensor, the current value that's been read by the light sensor, and data off the accelerometer. We'll quit out of that. And the next application I want to run is MBasic and one called Rainbow. And this one just demonstrates how you can use colors. So the terminal actually emulates a VT220 terminal from yesteryear, and I can Control C that. Now you'll see that this application here, because it was cycling through a number of colors, has left the color in green. That was the last escape sequence that was sent to the terminal to change the color. So exit out of that, and you'll notice everything's in green. You may not want everything in green. So if you go and type in clear, that will clear out the screen and then we'll reset everything back to the default color. On the B drive are the C and assembler. So there's a C compiler and there's the assembler. If I do a dir in there, you'll see I've got an application called hello world.c, and I can come along here and I can compile it. So the C compiler, hello world, and I can then link it, hello world, and then I can go and run it. And you'll see it just cycles through the current system tick count and the current UTC, and Control C will exit that application. As I mentioned also, there's an assembler. So I've got an application here. Actually, I showed you the clear command before. So the clear command is actually an assembly application. And you can play around with that. And in those list of manuals, there is a documentation on using the Intel 8080 assembler. So again, you can have fun with that. And it's a really safe way to play around with an assembler. You're not going to break anything. If I need to assemble it, I just go to assemb, and it was clear. And then I need to go and do a load clear, and then I can go and run it. And that will run the clear application that I wrote in assembly. So that is a very quick introduction to using the terminal and getting up and running with it. The documentation, you remember Control M is your friend if you get stuck and you need to go and reboot CPM. And in other parts of documentation, I also would talk about doing file editing. So check out the video, check out the table of contents on the wiki, and you'll see information about editing files in there. Anyway, hopefully that's enough to get you up and started with the Altair Emulator on Azure Sphere. Have fun.